Lesson 13 is about the nervous system. The nervous system is, of course, part of the regulatory system. Really, the nervous system and the endocrine system together are responsible for maintaining homeostasis inside the human being. Now, just like all of the human being is made up of different types of cells, muscle cells, fat cells, whatever, the nervous system is also made up of cells. Nerve cells are called neurons, and they are used to transmit electrical impulses for communication. The brain is the center where all the ideas and communications are generated, and then the nervous system has long lines of neurons that transmit the impulses from the brain throughout the body. The tasks of the neurons are to receive, process, and transmit information, and of course to control the movement of all the muscles to which they're attached. The path by which the nerve impulses is the dendrite, the cell body, the axon, and the synapse. We'll see a diagram of that in a minute. The dendrite receives the information, and then the nerve can produce neurotransmitters. Here's just an example. It starts over here. These are the dendrites out here, and the middle over here are the center of the neuron. It's the cell body. Then these lines are the axon, and the gaps, the places between the two neurons. There are three neurons in this picture. This neuron, and this neuron. See, they've all got dendrites. Dendrites are these leaf branch-like appendages at the end, which are specifically designed to be able to accept electrical impulses. That's, it gives them more surface area. Then there's the cell body in the middle. Then there's the axon, which are these long lines between them. And the little gaps between the neurons are called the synapses. And so what this does is that electrical symbols travel from the dendrites and over here and converge into the cell's body over here. And then it processes the information, and the cell body adds up the electrical signals it receives from the dendrites, which may spur positive action or it may spur negative action. It may cause the nerves to say, okay, do XYZ, or make sure XYZ is not done. When the sum of electrical symbols is sufficiently positive, it produces an action. It produces maybe a reflex, it produces a thought that causes us to move our hand, whatever it is. Okay, so the action potential is carried down the axon and then transported, then the message basically is transported down the axon and across the synapses and to the next neurons, where the process is repeated until it gets to whichever part of the body actually needs to do the stuff. Like when your brain sends a message to your arm saying to lift your arm, like I'm doing right now, although you can't see me, I'm waving, hi. That took a lot of, it didn't seem like it took me a lot of effort, but it took a tremendous number of brain impulses shooting down my spinal cord and then off to the right, into my right arm, into my right hand, causing all this stuff to be done. Caffeine lowers the threshold for an action potential, which means it causes us to be more jumpy. You didn't imagine it. People who drink a lot of coffee really are more jumpy, and that's because there's less of a signal that's required in order to stimulate an action. In order to facilitate the movement of these impulses are the electrical signals that are flying all over the place, the neurons produce a substance called myelin. Myelin, well, the thicker the axon, the faster. It's like if you have a copper wire, and if you want to transmit a lot of electrical impulse over a wire, it's going to need to be a little bit bigger. So the same thing is true with the axons. The axons are kind of like the electrical wires that go into the wall or into the utensil or whatever it is. So when the axon is covered in fatty myelin, the action potential can travel even faster. So the myelin, the sheath is like a shield. The sheath is like something that blocks, and that protects the axon and helps speed up action. So essentially that's what the myelin does. The myelin allows the nerve conduction, which the body produces, which the neuron produces, in order to protect the axons and to allow impulses to move at a faster rate. People with the disease MS or multiple sclerosis develop areas in which the myelin has disintegrated, which means that they're just the impulses that are moving around through the neurons are not going to be able to move around as quickly or as efficiently. And that's why it can result in paralysis or weakness, because the impulses are not going to travel around the body as efficiently as they otherwise would be able to do so. So those are the individual neurons. What about the nervous system in general? Well, the nervous system in general has two basic components. You have the central nervous system, and the central nervous system are simply the key components of the nervous system. Those are the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is where all the thoughts and signals start. The spinal cord is really the thick tumble of neurons that go down the middle of the back of your body. And really, that's like kind of the highway on which everything travels. I mean, think of the brain as being a data center with the computer, and the spinal system as being, 100 wires together, and then the wires kind of spread out around the room. So then, and when they spread out, that's called the peripheral nervous system, which transmits signals from the brain and the spinal cord to the rest of the body. What causes these signals to travel? Neurons. And the neurons that are designed to sense stimuli, to sense things, to get messages, are called sensory neurons. The neurons that cause action are called motor neurons. Let me show you a quick diagram. This is a very, very basic drawing of the person's nervous system. You got the brain over here, the central component of the central nervous system, the spinal cord where virtually all of the brain's impulses are going to go down, then they kind of spread out into the yellow, which is the peripheral nervous system. Now, the motor neurons, as we discussed, also are based on the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems. The somatic nervous system is associated with voluntary actions. When you lift your hand, when you run, when you do something like that, well, of course they have to be done by motor neurons in the peripheral nervous system. And those are considered part of the somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, controls involuntary actions. Things like heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, perspiration, breathing, swallowing, things that are not completely, some of them may be at least partially voluntary, but things that are not generally considered voluntary. Things like reflexes and these are also things that are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Reflexes are actually controlled by the backbone themselves. Here are some examples of neurotransmitters. A neurotransmitter essentially is a substance that is secreted in the body that allows impulses to move more easily from place to place. Here are some examples. There's epinephrine. Epinephrine is sometimes used as a drug from outside the body to help cardiac patients because it allows greater oxygen exchange to the individual cells that may be suffering when a person's suffering a heart attack or cardiac problems, and therefore not enough blood is getting around the body. So it's part of the sympathetic nervous system we discussed before. Actually, I didn't discuss it, but sympathetic is the part that prepares the body for stressful or energetic activity. So that's what epinephrine does. It activates organs in the nervous system to compensate when there's some sort of a problem going on. Also sometimes known as adrenaline. That's probably what we know it as better than. It stimulates the body to generate more energy and to move the impulses around more quickly. Endorphins are found in many parts of the brain and spinal cord, and they block the pain sensation and alter mood very often in a positive way. Endorphins very often make people happy, and you can even increase endorphins naturally. I think even something like exercise is known to increase endorphins and improve people's moods in that way. I was just reading that endorphins is sometimes comparable to something like morphine, which morphine is a very strong painkiller, a very strong sedative. Endorphins can have a similar effect, although on a little bit of a lower level. Then there's serotonin, which is found in the brain and the medulla, which is the lower part of the brain, which influences mood and sleep, helps people sleep, hopefully. And there's glutamate, which is a major neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. These are some things that are important within the body, and they also can be brought in from outside the body to kind of help the person. The brain itself, you've got the medulla, which controls this is really the bottom of the brain. Let me get you a diagram of the, actually there's one right over here. There's the medulla, which is on the bottom over here. This controls involuntary activities like heart rate and whatnot. Pons is just part of this, the back of the brain. Remember, the pituitary gland was the part of the brain that controlled the hypothalamus. I'm sorry, the hypothalamus controlled the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland used the various secretions to control the rest of the endocrine system. The pons influences sleep and breathing patterns, and then you have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the part of the brain that controls movement and balance, this yellow thing over here. You got the medulla that controls involuntary activities. You have the cerebellum, which controls balance and motor functions, ability to move your arms around properly, ability to do what you need to do from a motor perspective. And then, well, they contain many other important, it plays a role in various other things, sleep and wakefulness, emotion, movement. But then you have the number one, the biggest part of the brain is the cerebrum. This is the part where you have the thought that comes from. This whole area over here, the senses, the thought, etc. And you've got the cerebral cortex, which is the thin outer layer of each cerebral hemisphere. This is another diagram we have over here, that this is the cerebrum. This whole thing is the cerebrum over here, and you can see there are different hemispheres or different regions of the brain that control different things. You know, some parts of it may control memory, some part of it may control the five senses, you know, taste, touch, feel, smell, and hear, and thought and voluntary activities. Those are things that are controlled by the cerebrum. So the neurons in the cortex receive and process sensory information from the five senses. They direct voluntary movements. When you decide to do something, that thought is formed in your cerebrum. They create memories, allow us to be creative, and to envision the future. For example, I know that if I watch this crash course and study the PowerPoints, I will do well in this final exam. The lobes are called I don't even know how to pronounce these, so forget these. There are different lobes over here, and these control different functions within the brain. The brain itself is made up of two hemispheres, which means two halves. I mentioned before that there were several hemispheres. Of course, there can only be two hemispheres. Hemi means half, and sphere means circle. Like there can only be a western hemisphere and an eastern hemisphere of the globe. So you have the brain is made up of two hemispheres. The two hemispheres communicate through the corpus callosum, which is should be somewhere around here. And well, okay, anyway, so discoveries have shown that women have a larger one than men, and therefore have a greater ability to switch from the left side to the right side of the brain when part of the brain is damaged. Now, there's a lot of talk, especially in psychology, about what the left half of the brain takes care of and what the right half of the brain takes care of, and that's all fine and good, but the point is the entire brain controls voluntary activity. Different tasks are controlled by different parts of the brain. For example, it's possible that brain damage from a stroke is when oxygen gets cut off from the brain, or other injury can leave a person with the ability to comprehend written language but not spoken language, because written language and spoken language might come from different areas of the brain. And if there is brain damage, only the ability to do certain tasks that were controlled by that part of the brain might be affected. So let's take a look at some multiple choice. It's possible that brain damage from a stroke or other injury could reach a person with the ability to comprehend written without spoken language, as we just discussed. Which statement best explains this? Different aspects of language comprehension are controlled by different cells. Not really. Remember, there are millions of cells in each part of the brain. All aspects of language are the same part of the brain. That wouldn't make any sense, because then if there was a damage to one part, it should damage all cells all skills equally. C, on the other hand, looks pretty good. Different aspects of language comprehension are controlled by different parts of the brain. And by the way, again, like I mentioned earlier, I hope you're all pausing before I give the explanations in order to try to see if you can answer them yourself. I think that would be the best way to do it. So, after an accident, a professional musician has difficulty comprehending what is said and cannot associate instruments he has played with the sound they make. Which part of the brain is likely damaged? This is clearly the creative, sensory, voluntary part of the brain that was damaged over here. It wasn't a motor function, it wasn't an involuntary activity. So the part of the brain that seemingly was damaged was the cerebrum, or the cerebral cortex, which is the main component of the cerebrum. So the best answer would be C.